Hi, and welcome back to Consulting Business School. What are we going to talk about this week? Well, I'm going to talk about 7 business failures that I've had. Not huge failures, but I thought it might be fun to talk about those and to highlight some of the things that maybe you shouldn't do. That's coming right up. Okay, so this week I'm going to be talking about business failures. Now, if you haven't been on the channel before, or maybe even if you have, if you're finding these videos useful, you might want to actually subscribe, because that way you get to hear every time we put up a new video. You'll get an email. So you can just hit the red subscribe button and hit that little bell, and then you'll automatically get a notification. Okay, so 7 business failures. I have to confess, I have attention deficit disorder. So in business, that means I'm always chasing around doing, lots of different things at once. And I'm probably a bit of a magpie, so I sort of chase the bright, shiny objects. What that means is I'm forever starting new businesses and trying out new products and services, and they don't always work. I'm probably a bit older and wiser now, though. I don't do it quite so often. But what I thought I would do is to share 7 of those that didn't work and explain why. So maybe you'll think about them a little bit more carefully before you have a go. So in no particular order, I had a very interesting venture into Southeast Asia, which was probably, in about the year 2000, 2001. So that's with my consulting business Logistics Bureau. It was in 2000, and I happened to be in Thailand, met up with some great guys who were consulting in a different field. It seemed really complementary, and we started doing some projects together, and it was great. Really interesting projects, and it was great to have local people on the ground to work with. We then decided to formalize all of that, and we decided to put a formal joint venture together. We kind of took a long while to do it, and by the time we were ready to sign all the paperwork, they had sold their business to another company, and that company had actually floated. So we ended up having, as partners, people that we didn't really have a relationship with, and that it was a public company as well. So that was a little bit awkward, and it didn't work that well because it was down to the personal relationships, and by the time the whole deal was done, the relationships were with different people. So we pulled that one apart, and we kind of then established our own business there with local people. That was kind of a bit hit and miss. It's very difficult opening offshore offices, and finding the right people. Now it's fine. We've learned from that experience, and we have a good blend of people now running our office up in Southeast Asia. So, yeah. Just be careful. I suppose what's the lesson from that? Be careful who you kind of get into bed with, what kind of relationships, commercial relationships you're going to have, and think ahead. What are some of the things that might happen, and be prepared for that. I suppose that's the key lesson out of those ones. Another lesson, this was probably a few years later, we were very flattered when a big overseas company wanted to buy into one of our consulting companies here. And we ended up going through that. And I remember we had to sign a contract about this thick, literally like 200 pages. And they bought into a minority shareholding of the business. And that was great because we thought we were going to get some of that sort of marketing exposure, being hooked up with this big business and all that kind of stuff. They were actually fairly hands-off. And really it was the reverse. They kind of expected, I suppose, having a foot on the ground with us here in Australia and Southeast Asia, that they were going to leverage their large big business into our market rather than the other way. So that didn't last long either. What did I learn from that? Comes down to expectations. If you're going to partner with people in any form, be right up front about what your expectations are. So as an example, I get a lot of people, probably once a week, people contact me from overseas and say, I'd love to be your agent in whatever country. We'd love to represent you here. And what I do is I go back to them and say, would you like to send me a formal proposal? And there's like sort of 10 parts in it. What you expect out of the relationship, how it's going to work commercially, all different aspects of how it's going to work. And I never get a proposal back. which is fine. I just want people to think ahead and think about what kind of relationship they want in a bit of detail before, you know, we all get warm and fuzzy and say, let's do some stuff together. So, yeah, I suppose the lesson from all around that is, you know, with joint ventures and overseas partners, why do it? Have a very clear objective and make sure you're comfortable with the partners that you're going to be doing it with. I started a few businesses that really didn't work that well. So my core business, I should add, I'm not a total failure. My core business is Logistics Bureau. That's the one I started in 1997. It's still going strong and growing, and you know, that's my main business. That's going really well. I suppose because that has done well over the years, I've kind of dabbled in other things and thought, oh, if I can do that, maybe I can do this and do this. And that's where some of these failures come from. So many years ago, we thought we'd get into recruiting. You know, I mean, what an obvious fit. We're doing management consulting. It would be a natural follow-on to do recruiting. Except we didn't know anything about recruiting. It's quite hard. And you need to have a lot of experience in it. So one of the guys who was involved in that business, his wife was actually a recruiter, and she knew all about recruiting. We didn't really know much. And after a few months, it became very clear that it really wasn't going to work for us as a business. And we literally gave that business to her and said, look, you go and run it. You know what you're doing. So what's the lesson out of that one? Be careful about sort of range extensions and service extensions. Make sure that either it's something that you know how to do or that you've got people on board who are really good at it, because otherwise it's not going to make a lot of sense. So that was number 3. Number 4, very similar. We decided we'd get into systems and selling systems. That was such a bad idea for so many reasons. We don't get involved in systems at all now. As a management consulting company, we are pure. We are a pure play consulting company. We are vendor neutral. And I think it's one of our strengths that our clients really respect, that we're not going to try and sell them a system, or we're not going to try and get commissions off systems. Way back, you know, when we were thinking this, probably 20 years ago, we kind of thought it was a natural fit. And actually, that's where the name Logistics Bureau comes from, which my consulting business, because it was going to be a bureau of services. We were going to do consulting and recruiting and systems and training and all sorts of things. So we tried the systems business, kind of went the same way as the recruiting business. It's hard. And we tried it for a few months and then gave it away to someone. That was all too hard. In fact, we did the same thing with the training business. I just remember that. So his 8 failures. We actually took on board a training business from the UK, and we were going to be their representatives. And we thought, again, this is going to be a great fit. Guess what happened? We found it wasn't such a great fit, and we gave it away to the guy who was working on it. So, we've always had someone internally who was flying the flag for these different businesses and had the energy and the drive to do them. But in the end, it really wasn't for us, and we ended up just saying, look, you go and do that on your own. It wasn't a good fit with our business, and it was a distraction. That's the thing you've got to be careful of in business. Avoid the distractions, because my core business is Logistics Bureau. Everything that takes me away from that, I suppose, is really potentially undermining my core business. So it's got to be a good fit. It's got to be worth chasing for you to do it. So there was an extra one. There's actually going to be 8 failures. So now number 6. We decided to open an office in China. Why did we do that? I'm going to appear like a complete idiot, I think, in this video. So what happened, I had this lovely Chinese guy working for us here in Sydney. He worked for us for a couple of years. We had a number of Chinese staff actually in the business. And he was going back to China, and he said, hey, I can open a Logistics Bureau office in China. And so we did. We opened it in Beijing. Yeah. What went wrong with that? Well, I'll tell you what went wrong. We work all over the world in Logistics Bureau. We have worked in 24 different countries. The thing that enables us to do that is that we have a central pool of consultants between Australia and Thailand. We deploy those consultants on those assignments. It's a known quality. They're following all of our sort of methods and processes. But the biggest thing, all of our work is done in English, all of it. And that way, myself and my other directors, we can control the quality of everything that's going on. When we were doing work in China, it was all done in Chinese. It was all done in Mandarin. And how could we check the quality of reports and proposals and the work that was done for the client? We couldn't. And I was very uncomfortable with that, having to rely on a fairly junior guy, for the quality of all the work. And it's not really going to work. And it was a distraction. Yeah, I mean, I could have hired somebody, a manager who was bilingual to oversee it, but it was just risk, and it was a distraction from the core business. So we stopped that. What was another one? Education business. Okay, so another training business. So you remember the Logistics Bureau concept. This one was actually great. And I ran an education business alongside Logistics Bureau for 8 years, and it was brilliant. Loved it. And we would bring together people for a 2-day session 3 times a year. We'd have all of these fantastic speakers, and we'd be doing these practical exercises. And for 2 days, 3 times a year, they would get absolutely pumped. They would be picking up some great new knowledge, taking back to their businesses, and the people absolutely loved it. But I gave it up after 8 years. I didn't want to. I went on and on and on and on. And finally, I had to recognize that A, it was a huge distraction from my core business, and B, it was never really going to grow that much. And the problem is, I think it was an education program, an education style that probably didn't match what the market need, to be honest. It wasn't a sort of certification course. And a lot of companies wanted something that had accreditation and certificates, and it was a long story. But for us to be able to do that, we would have to get government approval. The government would then would stipulate what we had to teach, and that wasn't what I wanted to teach. And there was a few sort of complications like that. But it kind of meant that it never really got the momentum that it deserved. And so after 8 years, I sort of had to put my hand up and go, whilst I love doing this and people loved coming to it, it was never really going to sort of boom that much. So that one I unfortunately parked. So that was number 7. And number 8, I love doing events. Really love seminars and conferences and sharing information. That's why I love YouTube. I just love sharing stuff with other people to help other people in their success. And I actually started a conference business. And I wanted to kind of kick back against the conference industry, because from my perspective, which might be a little bit weird, all I could see was these conference companies charging an arm and a leg for people to go to the conferences, typically, $1,000 or $1,500 a day. All of these external speakers come in, and the conference companies put these programs together and make an absolute fortune. But the ticket price meant that a lot of people couldn't get to them. And so I had this idea that we would have this free conference. That wasn't a great idea, because free never works actually in business. People don't value free. And so what I did instead, I had this conference where it was a full day conference, lots of speakers, and I think the ticket price was $47, and we gave that to charity on the day. And it was great. People loved it. We'd have 250 people coming to this event, lots of networking and coaching, and people actually thought it was wonderful. We ran that for 3 years. The reason I finally stopped that one, and I probably never shared this publicly, is that we were able to do that conference because the experts who were coming along and sharing their knowledge would help us out with a small sponsorship, very small sponsorship, just to help with the cost of the conference. So it was basically a not-for-profit. All the ticket price went to charity, and the small sponsorship basically just covered the cost of putting the conference on. I just found it really tricky to get people to commit to coming along to that event and to just cough up this really small sponsorship fee. And kind of what was the last straw for me is that lots and lots of people were saying, yes, we'll sponsor, and then a few months out from the event, they'd say, oh, we're not going to do it, we'd rather not. So it was kind of that lack of commitment. I mean, there there were some people who were great. They supported us all the way through for 3 years, but there are others who were kind of hot and cold, and they would sort of say yes and then no, and I thought, oh, this is just too hard. Again, it was a distraction. I used to love the conference, and please, this is not a bitch about the sponsors. I suppose the lesson from this is that whilst you might be passionate about something and love doing something, be very careful about relying on other people for the whole viability of it, for the whole thing to work. So because we had issues getting the sponsors on board and then them dropping out and all this sort of stuff, it just became very stressful and a total distraction. So it was something that was very hard to control. So that's probably another lesson. Be really careful that you're not relying on other people too much. So that's probably it. So I gave you 8 there. All sorts of things that I've tried. As I've mentioned before, I'm really stubborn. I hate to give up on stuff. I like to give something a good go. There is nothing wrong, I reckon, in trying new services, new products, new businesses, but know when to quit. Don't stick with it too long, trying to flog a dead horse, as it were. Know when to commit and when it's time to pull the plug. So what would be the key lessons out of those, not huge failures, but I didn't lose a lot of money on anything, put it that way. So what would be the key lessons? Follow your passion, stick with it, stick with what you know. Don't overextend, don't go adding things on, just because you think it might be a good fit. Have a good hard think about that. Keep focused on what you're good at, what your market wants, and market test. I've quite often started new ventures without really doing proper market testing to see if there was a big enough demand for it, and what I was offering, was it in the right sort of shape and form that the market wanted. So you might have invented the best gadget, but if the market doesn't want the gadget, it's a total waste of time. You need to find out what gadget the market wants. And probably, look, this may be a negative in terms of my view of running businesses, but I like to retain ownership of things. I like to retain control of things. I don't like my destiny to be in the hands of other people. And that's probably been a big lesson for me over the years as well, where I've had minor shareholders from overseas, or I've had joint venture partners. Maybe I'm just not very good at managing those relationships, but I like to have control of what I'm doing. I'm not one of these people that wants to be overly controlling, but I like to know that I can control things if I have to. So if you actually talk to any of my fellow directors at Logistics Bureau, they would tell you that we actually do things in a very collaborative way. Even though I own the business, I do listen to people. We virtually sort of vote on major decisions, even though we don't have to do it that way. So I really do get people involved and value that involvement and that feedback. But I suppose in the back of my mind, I know at the end of the day, I can do what I want because I own the business. Very rare that I actually have to do that, but it kind of gives me that sense of comfort. Okay, so there's some lessons. Not just 7 failures, it was actually 8 that I came up with. Not desperately huge failures, but things that I probably shouldn't have bothered doing because they were a distraction. So bear that in mind when you're thinking about your own business and what you might be doing with it in the future. So there we go, that's it for this week. And if you enjoyed that, if you're enjoying other videos on the channel, you know what to do. You hit the subscribe button, you hit the bell, and that way you get to know every time there's a new video coming out, because they come out every week on a Wednesday. Have you had any business failures? I'd love to hear. Put in the comments down below. Well, what are your thoughts about extending services and product ranges and things like that? What have been some of your experiences, good or bad? Love to hear from you. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.